All righty, Truth Seekers. In this hour, we're going to be joined by Stephen Myers. He was on here a few weeks ago or a month or so ago, and we were discussing Ukraine and Russia. Stephen is a successful four-time CEO, a serial entrepreneur, a director of public and private company boards. He is an accomplished aviator, and Stephen also served 3 terms on the U.S. Department of State Advisory Committee on International Economic Policy under 2 different secretaries of state, Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. And he's got just a wonderful resume. And he was also the first American pilot since Charles Lindbergh to pilot an aircraft into the Russian Kamchatka Peninsula. So we are very happy to have him back. Stephen, Happy New Year. Welcome back.
Happy New Year to you and your listeners, Michael. It's great to be back on the program with you.
Well, we appreciate your time. You have a book called Crosswinds, Adventure and Entrepreneurship in the Russian Far East. Tell us for a second, before we get into our larger conversation, what was it you were doing in Russia entrepreneur-wise?
Sure. Well, at the end of the Cold War, for reasons you'll have to read in the book to find out about, I was invited by Russian foreign minister, this is after the fall of the USSR, to fly into the Kamchatka Peninsula. Long story how that came to pass. By the way, flying into that part of the world in 1992 was a dramatically different thing than now, some 30 years later. Technologies are vastly different. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have so many things in the cockpit that we take for granted today. It was an extremely dangerous, high-risk mission, very difficult flying. A lot of fun. So it's a great aviation adventure. It's a great story about entrepreneurship because after I arrived, I became the news in Far Eastern Russia for the Russians for about 2 weeks. Every night I was the headline news. I ended up meeting the governor of the Kamchatka Oblast, and together with him, we formed a joint venture that converted a very large military air base at the southern end of the Kamchatka Peninsula into an international cargo aircraft refueling base for wide-body international cargo carriers. So FedEx, UPS, World, Evergreen, everybody in the cargo business suddenly had a cheaper gas station. A lot of fun.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. And do you maintain relationships with people in Russia at this point?
I do. I have relationships with Russians, with Ukrainians. I find myself in an odd position, actually, for being a certified Cold Warrior. I think this war is wrong. I think it's a Greek tragedy. I think it's immoral. And I'm doing everything that I can to try and help bring it to an end.
I'm with you, brother. And it is tragic. It's complicated. One of my best friends, his wife is Ukrainian. Her family is there. And so I stand with the Ukrainian people and also with the Russian people. The governments, that's a different story. And, when this first started, February or March of last year, I thought, surely this can't last that long. I didn't really think that there would be much of a way that Ukraine would be able to hang on as long as they had. But I also didn't know that we would give them $150 billion or whatever it is. And Zelensky was, here in D.C. in December. We gave him some more. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to pick favorites here or say how much money we should or should not give them. But I don't know. I don't like proxy wars. I don't like this. I don't like the idea that this is a proxy war.
Well,
and it
not
is.
only a proxy war, it's an undeclared war. Yes, I don't remember getting the memo where I was invited to vote or the American people had anything to say about this conflict. We were just sort of on day one, told Russia bad, Ukraine good. We're going to, it's all about how the good people of Ukraine are the defenders of democracy. And I guess we're willing to defend democracy to the last Ukrainian. This is just utter and complete madness. Completely ignored the issues that caused the conflict in the first place. This war had been a long time coming because of really diplomatic malfeasance on the part of the West, not just the United States. I have to blame the leaders of Europe as well for failing to recognize that, look, every country is entitled to national security, even Russia. And certainly the idea of promoting trying to facilitate Tony Blinken's visit to Kiev a year ago, November, was sort of the last straw. He went over there, and instead of acting in a manner that might have facilitated a negotiation, a resolution of the conflict, he poured more fuel on the fire by promising outrageous things. Membership in NATO for Ukraine, a strategic alliance with the United States. What exactly did they expect the Russians to do about that?
Stephen, that's all I'm saying. And from the get-go, and I'm not trying to cry, oh, poor me, but when early on, if you tried to explain that to people, they got very upset. And Blinken, this guy's a total lightweight, and he's just the marionette of Victoria Nuland, who is a big part of the reason all this went awry back in 2014 anyway. But all of that is conveniently ignored. And neither one of us is apologizing for Putin. It's just that this is a very complex situation, and it's really diabolical that, everybody knew that they would never stand for Eastern expansion of NATO. That was common knowledge, and we ignore that.
Well, look, it's a disaster, and we are where we are. It's clearly time to end this war before, General Dvornikov gives the attack order, probably in the next month, after the ground completely freezes over in eastern Ukraine. And at some point, the Russians are going to mount that winter offensive we've been hearing about, and it's going to be a catastrophe. It is going to utterly and completely eviscerate the Ukrainian army. Yes, we hear stories about, barracks getting blown up and, a few dozen Russians getting killed. Basically, what we hear is an amplification of Ukrainian successes and little about their failures. And so I think what's going to happen is that the Russians are done screwing around. I don't think Zelensky, if he has grand plans for a spring offensive, I don't think he's going to have a country left to execute it if he keeps going the way he's going.
My guest is Stephen Myers. He is the author of Crosswinds, Adventure and Entrepreneurship in the Russian Far East. We're talking about what we think lies ahead in the Russia-Ukraine conflict into 2023. I was hoping that this would be somehow resolved by now. I had friends and guests who've been on this show who thought it would be, and maybe there's things going on in the background that we are not privy to, but it doesn't look like it's going to end in the immediate future. And Stephen's saying that he believes that the Russians get serious in the near future, especially when the ice gets cold. I've heard the same thing. What concerns me, when Zelensky came to DC recently, Nancy Pelosi's shedding tears and we're giving them the money and all this. And I'm not trying to pick on Zelensky. That's not the point. The point is the fact that our unswerving support of this, giving them more money, I don't know if we could ever give them enough money to make a difference. And I feel like we're just prolonging this humanitarian disaster.
I think it's theater. Biden is now, on record as giving Zelensky counsel that it may be time to negotiate an end to this. But then Zelensky turns around and says, yes, we should have negotiations in February. But first, we'll have war crimes trials and we'll have the UN manage all of that. Well, this isn't serious. This is just nonsense. First of all, war crime trials take years, not days, to resolve. Huge amount of work to go through to find out who did what to who. And I think it only undermines his ability to get anywhere with Putin. Putin's not going to agree to a ceasefire and agree to negotiations unless he believes that there's a credible possibility of reaching a settlement. Well, Zelensky keeps making ridiculous preconditioned demands. For example, the withdrawal of the Russians from the Donbass, never going to happen, and so forth. I actually have a strategy for bringing this conflict to an end, and I'd like to share that with you and your listeners. I think the problem is we keep talking about negotiations when we ought to be talking about mediation. Now, what is the difference? Let's talk about that difference. What's
Can
that?
I just interject one thing?
Sure.
Mediation, that was the most infuriating thing to me about all of this from the get-go. The U.S. should have used its place on the global stage to do that very exact thing in the beginning, and we did not. I yield the floor to you now.
Well, that's absolutely right. In fact, for 2 years since Biden's come to office, they've done everything they can to provoke this war, to escalate this war. And that isn't that's what Kissinger's been talking about. That's just not statesmanship. That's not historically the role that the United States has played in the world since the end of World War II. We have ameliorated every conflict with Russia since the end of World War II until now. And somehow they've gotten it into their heads that this conflict in Ukraine is an opportunity to weaken Russia. But I want you to think about that for a minute, because when people talk like that, they use an interesting phrase, all moral considerations aside. That says it all. You don't put moral considerations aside when you're dealing with the lives of millions and millions of people. Okay, the Ukrainian people are paying with their blood for the hubris of nihilist politicians. That's what's going on here. Now, how do we get out of this jackpot? Because it certainly isn't the United States that's going to make that happen. In fact, all the United States can do now is prevent it from happening. I think we need a mediator. Now, for the benefit of your audience, the difference between negotiation and mediation is the difference between two parties getting a divorce, going to court, and letting the lawyers duke it out, and having a mediator that resolves all of the, versus having a mediator that resolves all of the issues involved in the conflict in the marriage. Problem with negotiation for the resolution of a marriage is the same with negotiations and resolving a military conflict. It doesn't actually resolve all of the underlying issues. It may result in a stopping of the immediate conflict, but the conflict's going to start up again because none of the underlying issues are resolved. And there are many issues on the table. It sounds simple when you hear Putin talk about it or you hear Zelensky talk about it. You know, NATO membership is just one issue, and there are probably 25 that I could sit here and rattle off. There are many issues. So we've got to stop this merry-go-round. And the way that we do that is we get the sides without the belligerents on all sides, without any preconditions, to agree on a mediator. And I think there's only one mediator left in the world who could do this. And unfortunately, Zelensky was on your earlier segment. Zelensky has kind of screwed that up. That mediator is Israel. Now, the reason I think that Netanyahu has been doing such a careful job of avoiding taking sides in this conflict is that they know that at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to step in and work through all of these issues that would be acceptable to both sides. I think Israel is the only country that I can think of that could be potentially acceptable to all the belligerents. Keep in mind, you know, Israel understands more about protracted conflict better than any other nation in the world. And they have another wonderful, charming quality. They're uber hagglers. Okay. And this is going to take a lot of haggling to get months, years to get these belligerents to finally achieve a durable resolution. So rather than wasting time talking about, you know, what the outcome of mediation would look like, or who's going to look like a loser and who's going to look like a winner, we need to stop the fighting before this goes to the next level. One of my favorite podcasters on all of this is Colonel Douglas McGregor. I'm sure you've heard him. And he talks in more detail than I could about the strategic situation of Russia's military versus Ukraine. And it's very clear we're being lied to. We're hearing a narrative, we're hearing propaganda. And of course, all of that is masquerading the strategic reality on the ground. So I think we've got to start getting real about this situation. And now I don't know what to think that Zelensky has really gone out of his way to offend Israel by not showing up for a vote on something in which moral considerations are the central issue.
Well, unfortunately, I think the thing that we're left to kind of speculate upon is unfortunately what it looks like if Israel is in fact the best candidate for a mediator, and Zelensky throws a wrench in that. Well, then it seems like that was probably intentional.
I think so. It was even worse than that, because what he was actually saying to Netanyahu, bribe me, and I'll agree to vote against the UN resolution. This is, from Netanyahu's standpoint, and I've met Netanyahu, he is a brilliant guy, very shrewd, very thoughtful. You'll notice he didn't take the bait. He's too smart for that. He sees the United States, Zelensky, and Putin, I think, all up a tree with no way down. And so the only way that this whole matter can get resolved is to talk these people down. And that can't happen in the middle of a firefight. So we've got to get them. We need a ceasefire. There's not going to be a ceasefire unless we can identify a mediator. Then the United Nations could supervise the ceasefire and provide the funding so that the mediations could occur. It's going to take a long time. A lot of details about what that ceasefire would look like. That's the pathway out. I don't see another way out. And I think Netanyahu will probably overlook Zelensky's slight if he sees any indication at all of Zelensky coming to his senses. I don't know what to think of the man. He thinks that getting more money is going to improve his situation. It was providing the money in the first place that got them into this war. If Blinken had said, look, we're just not going to finance this war, you're going to have to sit down with Putin and make a deal. And he said, well, Putin won't even take my calls. Well, okay, we'll fix that. We'll go see Putin and we'll get him to sit down with you. You guys can make a deal, but we got to keep this real. You're not going to join NATO. I think that you have to show more respect for the Russians in eastern Ukraine and so forth.
Stephen Myers served 3 terms on the U.S. Department of State Advisory Committee on International Economic Policy under both Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. And just one quick question before we proceed on. When you were part of those organizations, did you guys discuss Ukraine very much? Was it on the table at the time, or was that kind of in the background?
There was no discussion of Ukraine. The primary issue we were dealing with at the time were sanctions against Iran. And where I parted company with the Obama administration was over what I thought was an idiotic idea of packing up airplanes full of money to send to the Iranians in order to bribe them to sign a nuclear agreement that was impossible to enforce, impossible to inspect, that they would cheat on 100%. This was just absurd. And I was very grateful to see, as one of the first actions Trump took when he came to office was to kill that deal. I was stunned. I was really stunned at the administration's performance in the second term, the Obama administration. The situation with Iranian sanctions was working extremely well. We didn't need to change a thing. We just needed to keep doing what we were doing. The regime was suffering greatly. The people, that's the only way this ends peacefully, is regime change in Iran. And the sanctions were doing real material harm to their leadership's ability to govern. I was very sad about that. It's very interesting seeing the perspectives of our political leaders up close and personal. And I have to tell you, I didn't like what I saw very much. I'm very sad to report They'll say anything, they'll do anything, they'll believe anything if it supports their political agenda. And that's just simply not the way our country is. I read somewhere recently that every single president the Democrats have elected was an attorney since, the beginning of the 20th century, maybe.
So they're naturally argumentative?
Well,
combative?
I've had many attorneys work for me. Well, let me finish the other side of this.
I'm sorry.
The Republicans, none of the Republicans are attorneys. I think only one Republican was an attorney. None of the Republicans are attorneys. They're all business people. They're all people that are used to solving problems. They actually are real leaders who have led real things and then came into politics because they wanted to fix things, only to find out that the system is so corrupt. Anywhere in the world, what goes on in Washington would be flat out bribery. Here it's called lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it's indistinguishable from bribing. So my point is that this difference in backgrounds between Democratic political leaders and Republican political leaders explains a lot of the dysfunctionality, because the Democrats want to argue in order to win a point. Republicans want to solve a problem unless they've been bribed up. And then they end up supporting a lot of the same nonsense. I couldn't believe this omnibus bill that just got passed. Why in the world would the Senate Republicans agree to any bill, okay, instead of kicking the can into January when we have a Republican House and we'd be able to inject some reality?
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that because I see it the same way. Let me ask you about this. The last time you and I spoke, we were kind of recapping the fact that Dugina, his daughter, had been assassinated. The Nord Stream pipeline had blown up. The Kerch Bridge was blown up. So now we're at this point where people are using the terms false flags. I would hate to see that happen, but nothing would surprise me at this point. So you're saying we need to mediate this. Israel would be a good candidate. Of course, we don't know if that will happen or not. But this is a dangerous time because some people think, okay, well, somehow there's going to be U.S. boots on the ground or Polish boots on the ground, and maybe there's a false flag. I don't know. This is a treacherous time.
Well, yes, there's been talk about, somehow putting together some 40,000 troop contingent of Poles, maybe some Romanians and U.S. forces to just go in there and bolster up the Ukrainians. And somehow this is going to make the Russians start trembling. I think that they're stupid. And then there's whatever that is. We're going to get those people killed.
It's a meat grinder for sure.
Like the worst idea ever. And, the real proof in the silliness of our approach to this whole thing is this idea of Patriot missiles. I can't think of a more useless system to send to the Ukraine that puts on, and by the way, I can't even imagine when they get delivered. The Ukrainians would have absolutely no ability to operate them. They're useless against the threats that they're facing from the Russians. And oh, by the way, it's a $4 million price every time you launch one of those. And we never launch one, we always launch two. So, we're going to run out of Patriot missiles, even if we were going to use them. But those batteries are not as mobile as they need to be and are likely to get blown up on the ground anyway. This isn't serious. And neither is the talk about putting U.S. troops on the ground. We, by the way, got a myriad of contractors on the ground, and God knows how many Americans wearing uniforms from someplace else on the ground. I think that this has every potential to go very, very badly, very quickly in an escalated conflict. I'd like to repeat my claim that I made last time. I've been having a lot of fun with that. Who is it that blew up Nord Stream 2? And there's 4 pipelines. 3 of them got blown up. 1 of them didn't detonate. The Swedes got the munitions off the pipeline, went home, did a lot of analysis, and said exactly 0 about it for now, 6-8 weeks? Well, if the Russians did it, don't you think they would have been eager to say something since they all about joining NATO? They said nothing. They said nothing. Well, who does that leave that would have done it? Okay, so obviously, and this is my claim, folks, Biden did it.
Yep.
He said he was going to do it, and he did it.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that the Germans have not gone completely insane over this. Who are we to do this kind? This is terrorism. We just committed an act of terrorism against Europe because what we did was make it impossible for them to get adequate oil and gas through the pipeline system that they had paid for with the Russians that could have been made operational at any time. We made it impossible to do that. And now Europe is looking at a tough winter. They're paying 10x for oil and gas on the spot market. They're going to go into deep recession in 23. I hear that Mercedes-Benz sales alone, production is already down 25%, and thousands of factories have closed in Germany. So this has got to stop.
There are so many problems here. I mean, we're already in a recession in the U.S. Nobody wants to accept that yet. Then what we did on the world stage through our support of all of this, I mean, I don't want to be the guy that says everybody hates America, but there's a lot of people that hate America. And it's because we intervene in things that we should not intervene in, and we actually have no right to do so. So why do we do so? There's a few different reasons, but when you're talking about these $4 million missiles that we're selling that they can't use, perhaps that's one of the reasons. And I hate to be that negative.
Well, we sound so cynical about it. I hate that I've come to the point of view that is filled with cynicism about our expectations for our political leaders, the kind of deals that they would actually make. Is it really true? Are we actually in a situation where, because of bribes and political intrigue and money, and God knows what's going on with Hunter Biden, is that what this war is about? Is that what all these conflicts are about?
I think that is part of what this is about. And I think it was brewing for a long time, just like you said. And yeah, I mean, the Bidens, oh my God. I mean, we spend all of this time talking about Trump or whatever. I argue that the more time you spend blaming Trump is the less time that you're spending actually solving any problems, which leaves me to think that you don't want to solve any problems. You want to have a continued cycle of chaos, which I reach out to my brothers and sisters who support these guys. Please, you guys see this for what it is, which is completely unhelpful.
Absolutely. It seems to me that the Democrats can't make up their minds. Do they want to run against Trump, or do they not want against Trump? On the one hand, they're trying to fix it so he can't run. On the other hand, all they want to do is talk about him. And of course, that prevents the field from being cleared so we can move on with the future of our country, right? We're just going to be trapped in this merry-go-round of nonsense that doesn't move the country forward. This recession, 100% Biden's play, oil and gas in the United States, cutting it off.
Stephen, I hear the music. We will have you back very soon because I enjoy these conversations a lot. And Stephen, tell everybody about where your website and where they get the book.
Yeah, I encourage you all to go to StephenMyers.com. That's StephenMyers.com. There you'll find all kinds of interesting stuff on the war in Ukraine, and a place to push the button and go to Amazon to order my book. I think you'll enjoy it.
Stephen, thank you so much. I have about 15 seconds here. Ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year. Happy 2023. Happy New Year to you, Stephen. I'll see you guys back here tomorrow. Cheers. Peace.